Hey everybody, welcome back to a new painting assignment. Today we're going to be talking about making an abstract painting, and I'm going to go through a little bit of different methods to do that and show some examples, and then also do some painting studies so you can see what might be possible. So I'm going to share my screen so we can go into this and talk a little bit about the project. So ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to make an abstract painting, but I want it to be, referenced by your still life painting. So here's an example. On the screen, you can see a representational painting by Mary Cassatt called Lilacs in the Window. And it clearly is what the title says, right? It's a vase with cut lilacs in a window. And a very effective use of color and light and texture and tone, just a really wonderful still life painting. This piece on the right is by Bridget Riley called Close Up, and this is an abstraction. And here you can see this is not a representation of something, right? I mean, you could stretch your imagination and say it is a representation of static on a TV screen or something like that, right? But ultimately, this is about shape, form, color, and composition. And so she's using color in a very effective way. Now, if we had to compare these two and make a reference between them, I would say that the color palette has a lot of similarities, right? So there's certainly a whole lot of purple that is activated in this composition, green that's activated in the composition, and elements of white. And then there's the pale hues of pink and other sort of earth tones that come through. So it's almost as though you could imagine the lilacs in the window being tilted on its side and then pixelated and digitized into something like the abstraction by Bridget Riley. Now, that wasn't the intent, but ultimately that's what I want us to think about. What can we do with the still life painting? What can we take from it? What can we draw from it and make something that's an abstraction? So one way we can think about that is by considering different types of modes of abstraction. And what we'll talk about today, boy, I butchered that, different types of modes of abstraction. And we're going to talk today about reducing form. And so quick ideas about that would be if you imagine taking an image and really blocking it out to simple shapes and color, right? In this case, we have these paintings that have been blocked out to their very minimal compositional elements and using strict white and black. And in this, you can see elements that start to become abstracted, right? They're straying from the realism that we know into something that is more about shape and form. And in this case, very high contrast. Same here, right? If I was to cover up this area here of the woman's arms and head, the rest of it would seem very abstract, right? We would have to stretch to imagine what those pieces coming together would be. So this idea of taking a form and reducing it down, or an image and reducing it down, can be a really effective way of starting to make an abstract painting. Here we have a painting by Artemisia Gentileschi, Judith and her maidservant. And this, is a very realistic painting. This is after actually a beheading of Horus, and there's a sword being held there. And in this case, there's a digital representation of this being reduced down to a very geometric sort of form. So here is that reduction of form, right? So when we look at these two, we can clearly see similarity in color, right? There's a strong sense of very warm colors from yellow, orange, red, and violet. And we see that represented here. We also see composition that's the same. So the sweeping arc of the red drapery, the two figures, the candle are represented here, but minimized down to triangles, swirls, spirals, arcs, right? So the idea of that being reduced from high representation to geometric representation abstracts the form, and we now have an abstract painting. So if we didn't see these next to each other, we wouldn't make the direct reference, right? Or it would be a stretch to do that. Here you can see a slow reduction of that form, right? From something that's more pixelated and triangulated to introductions of swirls and further reduction until we get down to even further reduction of form into that final composition. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about for this project is, can you take elements of your still life, color, shape, form, texture, and reduce those down into a new abstract painting. Here's an example. I'll take a minute and let you guess what it might be. That's a good guess. Of course, it is the Mona Lisa, right? Reduced down to simple circles in a grid with a very minimal use of hues to represent those areas of color, right? So it's like a sampling of those things, or again, pixelated through a screen. And you know, if we zoom out on this quite a bit, you can really see that image start to take form, right? So this is a reduction of form. It's an abstraction, right? It uses a system to employ the strategy here. And this is the reference. So similar sort of thing. This would be your, you know, representational still life. This could be your abstraction. So those modes are interesting. What I'm interested in for this project is that, you know, that you're really creative with how you break down these forms. Here's a print by Picasso showing different modes of reducing the form of a bull down. And this has been repeated. It must have been some sort of, you know, early abstract artist assignment. This is Mondrian's version, a sketch in a sketchbook of a cow. And then you can see here something that looks similar in form and yet broken down into high geometry. And then later on, Roy Lichtenstein did a series of prints kind of mimicking that form. And here we can see the image of a bull slowly reducing down the form. Even in this image, you can see a little bit of the tail and what you could imagine to be the head and the horns, but then it just blows out into total shape and form and design. So that's what I'm thinking about for this project. Can you take images of your still life, reduce it down to an abstraction, thinking about this notion of reduction of form? Final series of images are a group of paintings by Pierre Mondrian, and these are not meant to be sequential. This is actually kind of more of a timeline. So starting, the earliest paintings are these that are more representational. We can see this wonderful image of a tree, great combination of warm and cool colors working together, reducing down to a form like in this painting. Further down here, you know, still keeping the curves and arcs of something that's a bit more organic and natural, and then moving into the grid geometry that we see into very minimalist color and form until finally, you know, a series of black stripes on a white background. So if we look at this as an imagining, it reducing down from an organic object, a tree, into a high geometry, you can imagine that sort of reduction of form. Okay, so from here, we're going to go into some quick study examples, and your challenge for this project is to look at your still life, make some sketches about how you could reduce the form down, right? Consider some relationships that you're going to have that carry through: color, form, texture, line, light, shadow. Those things can totally apply. And your goal is to make an abstract painting. And ultimately, at the end, you're going to put the two side by side, just like in the very first slide that we looked at, and talk about how you moved from your representational still life painting to your abstraction.